So, Stephen Bush with you again with the Bush Law Group, and we are talking about post-loss obligations. We're on to our second post-loss obligation that we want to discuss with you today, and that is mitigation of damages. Now, if you're a contractor or a public adjuster, you already know what mitigation of damages are, right? So, and I'm sure that each and every one of you out there are already mitigating damages to your property. So if the policyholder has a loss and that loss is a continuing loss, the policyholder has a duty under the policy, right, to stop any further damage. And the way they do that is through mitigation, right? So I know that you guys have already got that part down. So what I want to go into with you today, and I want to talk about a little farther, is how much can you mitigate? What's too much? What's reasonable? Those types of things. So let's look at the first thing. All right, so mitigation, this clause, it imposes a duty on the policyholder to take all reasonable, all right, did you hear me? All reasonable steps to prevent or minimize further loss. In other words, the insurance company says, okay, look, we may be, because at this point we don't know, we haven't investigated the loss, but we may be liable. So what we don't want is we don't want you to let it continue on so that our liability or our responsibility goes beyond what the actual loss is. You got to mitigate those losses, but you got to be reasonable. So mitigation must avoid taking steps that might increase the loss, right? So you can't increase the loss. And the test that most courts impose is that reasonable person standard. In other words, when you mitigated, was it reasonable for you to take the steps that you took in order to prevent further loss? Now, I have seen and I have litigated cases where mitigation companies have gone in and they basically stripped the house clean. And then when it come down to what actually the loss was, it was just literally a loss in one room, but they felt necessary to strip the whole house. So that wasn't reasonable, right? So you got to look at this and say, okay, what's reasonable to stop and prevent further damages and not to increase the loss? The policyholder has a duty under the policy to act promptly and must not wait on the insurer's determination of the validity of the claim or to receive payments. So first post-loss obligation was to report the loss, right? Report it promptly. Second post-loss obligation is to act to prevent further damages from happening. The policyholder must reasonably mitigate the damages even if it means incurring out-of-pocket expenses. So they have to do that. Now, are those mitigation expenses reimbursable? Yes, they are. But to what extent? If mitigation goes beyond what is reasonable, the policyholder is on the hook for those, not the insurance company. Don't shoot the messenger, folks. That's just the way it works, all right? So, what is reasonable? That's the question, right? What's reasonable? Well, that depends on the circumstances. The example that I gave you a while ago, that wasn't very reasonable. The damages were limited to the kitchen in the instance that I'm talking about. But way on the other side of the room, they stripped it clean. And we can't figure out why. To this day, I still don't have an answer why they stripped that room clean. But that was not reasonable. So the policyholder must reasonably believe that mitigation is necessary, that it was owing to the perceived danger of further loss. Now, this is very important, that it was owing to the perceived danger of further loss, and that the loss is caused by a risk insured against. In other words, a risk that's covered under the terms and conditions of the policy. All right. To be reimbursed for mitigation expenses, the policyholder must keep an accurate account of all the amounts spent and provide receipts, and sometimes even cancel checks are required. Now, I always encourage the contractors that I work with, mitigation companies I work with, the public adjusters I work with, and the property managers. Before you mitigate anything, you really need to document with photographs, not one or two, but hundreds of photographs. Document this loss. Document why the need for mitigation was there, and then what you did mitigate. All right, if you'll do that, you get a better chance of getting reimbursed. So, second post-loss obligation, mitigation, prevent further damages. Stay tuned, because now we're going to talk about the third one, and that is the cooperation clause and the duty to show the damaged property. I'll see you in just a second.